Oh.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, because we have people from all over the country here. And I'm really, really pleased and excited to have Mia Mask here, who's going to be talking about Black Rodeo, but so many other things. Like I've been talking to her a little bit in the last day or so, and I don't know how we're going to fit it all into an hour. But before we get there, I wanted to say a couple things. One is I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. And I'd also welcome, wait a minute, I lost my thing. We collaborated, Mia let us collaborate with a bunch of other libraries for this program. And I always say that when libraries collaborate and work together, we make magic. So we were all able to bring Mia to Ashland. And so I welcome the patrons from Swampscott, Tewksbury, Lowell, Peabody, Shrewsbury, Watertown, Hopkinton, Newton, Manchester, and of course, Ashland. I also want to say that yes, magic, of course, Paula. You can buy signed books from Mia from Bank Square Books. I will put the link in the chat as we're talking. And also, I would ask that you put your questions in the Q&A and your chat in the chat, because that is easier for me to keep a track of. But this is a Q&A, so feel free to start from the very beginning. I have lots and lots of questions, so I'll have to make space for yours, but I will, because that's what I do. So Mia is a professor at Vassar College. Sorry, she's the endowed chair of film at Vassar College, and she wrote obviously Black Rodeo, which we were talking about today, but she also wrote Divas on Screen, Black Women in American Film, and several other tomes that we want to hear about. But I would like to hand it over to you, Mia, to say, tell us more about yourself, because everybody here who's been here before knows that I do terrible introductions.
No.
But I'd also like to hear a little bit about your take on how Black Rodeo came to be.
Sure. Thank you, Mina. And thank you so much for having me and for putting this program together. It's really fun to be with you folks tonight. So Black Rodeo is such a rewarding moment, because I feel like it's the book I really wanted to write for a long time, but it was taking me a while to get to it. My first book was Divas on Screen, Black Women in American Film, and that came out of my dissertation. And I was delighted when my first book came out. And then, as you said, I have had the two collections or anthologies that came after. But Black Rodeo was a project that was near and dear to my heart, because I'm also a rider, a lifelong, lover of horses and all kinds of animals. So just the equestrian culture that I was involved in, and even in researching the book, was just really fun for me. But it came out of, from a scholarly standpoint, it came out of a conference, really, back in 2010. I went to, and I have a little show and tell, the Sidney Poitier International Conference and Film Festival in Nassau, Bahamas. And this was a wonderful opportunity, because it was a group of Poitier scholars coming together to talk about a variety of Poitier films. And we were able to interface with his family as well, because this is sort of his hometown where he was born and where he still has relatives. And I was giving a paper on a Poitier Western, Buck and the Preacher. And this conference sort of took me down this fantastic sort of path, wherein one of the things we did at the conference was we were able to have a conference call with Mr. Poitier. And we were able to ask him as a group, because this was a relatively small, intimate conference, of all the films that you appeared in or directed, which Mr. Poitier was your favorite? And obviously, Mina, I was over the moon when he said Buck and the Preacher was his favorite film. Mm-hmm. I mean, I felt like I have a reason to live now. I'm joking, but I was such a big fan and student of his career. So I continued to work and publish on that film, and my chapter actually in the Poitier anthology over here is on Buck and the Preacher. But I wanted to continue to do research on that film and learn more about his work in other Westerns, like Dula Diablo. But it also led me to start asking questions about the Western genre. So much is written about the Western genre, but almost nothing, very little had been written about Black Westerns. So there are a handful of other titles, but certainly none dealing with contemporary, and by contemporary I mean post-World War II, right, Westerns. So that enabled me to say, okay, I really have a point of departure and a focus, which will be Westerns made after 1955, right? And and looking at the film sort of in that immediate post-war era, but obviously in the immediate post-war era, you have a lot of, you're still seeing combat films. And so I took up those films with the recognition that other scholars had written about the all-Black cast Westerns from the 1930s, Harlem Rides the Range, The Two Gunmen from Harlem, Harlem on the Prairie, some of these early all-Black cast Westerns. And so it enabled me to focus on the post-World War II Westerns. And that's really how the book came to, sort of the project came together.
And so this is really interesting to me because you're, the chair of the film department.
Well, not anymore, actually. So I should clarify. So I have an endowed chair, but I'm not actually the organizational chair. So there's the chair of the department, and there's somebody who, like, if you have an endowed chair, it's an honorary title as opposed to being the administrative head of the department. I'm actually happy not to be the department chair.
I hear you on that. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, you have a long history in film, but what brought together your the Black history and the film to do this book and Divas?
Right, excellent. Well, when I was in graduate school, we were learning so much about world cinema, and I loved every single course that I took at NYU and loved cinema studies. And so many people said, don't you want to make films? And I was like, no, if I wanted to make films, I would be making films. I love film studies, film history, theory, criticism. And I really wanted to be a film critic. But we found that at the time, there really wasn't a lot published on African-American cinema. I mean, there was Donald Bogle's wonderful book, Tom's, Coons, Mammy's, Mulattoes, and Bucks, an interpretive history of African-American in film. And then shortly after I had entered graduate school, Ed Guerrero published Framing Blackness. And there were a handful of books, but not a lot of scholarly work had been published at that time on African-American cinema. So my whole cohort, right, which includes people like Jackie Stewart and Michael Gillespie and so many people, Paula Massoud and many others, really decided, African-American cinema needs more attention. Charlene Register, many people were sort of in our graduate school cohort, both at NYU and other schools. And I think it's that sort of generation that really began to look at, even as people like Anna Everett and Jackie Stewart, early African-American cinema, the early all-Black cast films, and we see the wonderful work that Jackie Stewart has done, and now she's at the Academy, and Anna Everett's work on early audiences and migration narratives as they relate. So my early work came out of a desire to then say, well, what aren't we doing yet? What aren't we publishing on? And we really hadn't seen a lot in the field of star studies. So African-American celebrity hadn't really entered into the critical discourse. And so I was interested in Black women film stars, and that's how Divas was born. And it's a star study, and I look at 5 African-American women film stars. I start with Dorothy Dandridge, and then I go through Pam Grier, Whoopi Goldberg, Oprah Winfrey, and Halle Berry. And I'm certainly not saying they're the only, there are so many others, Eartha Kitt, Diane Carroll, many others that I would like to have included, but I had to select a subset that I wanted to look at closely and do a deep dive on and say, what is it about their careers or about their particular brand of celebrity that enabled them to have some longevity and some success, when so many others have tried and met with less or modest or meager success. So that's how divas came to fruition. So it's really just out of a need. The sort of the intersection of African-American history and culture and cinema came out of this need to fill a void in the field of cinema studies. And when you're getting a PhD, you're really trying to add to the existing scholarship, or something new to the existing scholarship.
Did it surprise you or your cohort that there wasn't much written about this thing, that because celebrities are, at least now, constantly out there? Yeah. So was it a surprise to you?
Absolutely. I mean, so this was at a time before, even Paul Robeson was being looked at, and before his films were being remastered and put on DVD. So yes, obviously people knew Paul Robeson's wonderful and illustrious career in in the theater and on stage, but they hadn't gone back and put his films onto DVD yet, or seen those films remastered, and thought about his work with Oscar Michaud. I mean, I will say St. Clair Bourne had made the documentary Paul Robeson, Here I Stand, which is a wonderful film that your listeners should try to see, wonderful documentary. But yeah, I was surprised, absolutely, that there wasn't much literature on African-American film stars. And as you say, that's changed a lot.
Yeah, and I will come back to that because, as you know from our conversation yesterday, I'm fascinated by that whole thing. But I would like to dig into Black Rodeo a little bit. What inspired the picking of the stories within Black Rodeo for you?
You mean the selection of the films?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So, well, what were you going to say?
You just said it better.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I just wasn't sure what you meant. Yeah, so I selected these films, again, based on their cultural importance and the extent to which they had made an impact on audiences. So Woody Strode, for example, was a good place to, he offered a good sort of case study in terms of his career, and a good point of departure. This is an African-American actor who had worked closely with John Ford in a number of films, and John Ford will feature him, and he will put him in a starring role in Sergeant Rutledge. And this is a film that's released in 1960, and it really, for me, marks the beginning of a shift, I would say, in the shift in the Western, wherein we're now looking at the African-American experience in the West through different characters, through different experiences. So I wanted to start with Woody Strode, and then I was interested in which other actors had managed to make an important impression on the genre, or make significant films within the genre that had some longevity and had made a sort of significant cultural impact on the zeitgeist, so to speak. And then I saw that, the next major figure was Jim Brown, right? In terms of having made Rio Concho, 100 Rifles, and El Condor. Right. And then shortly after him, almost sort of alongside of him, we see Poitier's Westerns, 1966, and then just a few years later, 1972, Buck and the Preacher. So I had to have a chapter, obviously, on Poitier. And right on the coattails of Jim Brown's career, we see Fred Williamson emerging as a figure in this genre. So I was able to select actors who had had made some imprint on the zeitgeist.
And can you talk a little bit about the format of your book, because it is a selection of films and then sort of a deep dive into each one of them in a study, and the research is just, for those of you who have not read it yet, it's just it's deep. It's so
Oh,
good. I can tell
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as a librarian, I'm just kind of like, wow, you really, you really dove deep. So can you talk a little bit about the format of the book and how you decided to go in that direction?
Mina, you're my best friend now. Okay. Yeah, the format of the book, well, I am somebody who is trained in cinema studies. And so we look at in cinema studies, there are various methodologies that we bring to film analysis. Sometimes it is, we are doing a star study, right? And so it will entail examining the careers of film stars over and across multiple texts. Sometimes it's a genre study. So we're looking specifically at the nuances of the genre and how genres evolve over time and mutate and change in response to the culture and politics. Sometimes we are thinking about how to do a close textual analysis of these films in light of intersecting issues. So politics, race, gender, sexuality, as that is influenced by the genre and the way the genre evolves. And so that's what I'm really striving for with Black Rodeo, that is close textual analysis. So I am somebody, given that I'm trained in cinema studies, like to do close readings of text, because I think that helps us to really understand what the films are saying. And in a close reading, it's not as though one is ever going to make the claim that the film is only saying X or Y, right? Or that the film is making one, offering one set of meanings for interpretation. There's a recognition that there are multiple layers of meaning at work simultaneously. And that's kind of an enriching and exciting sort of project to be engaged in. So that's what kind of motivated me to provide a series of close readings, to line these films up and say, let's look at them closely, think about what they're saying and what those texts reveal about the changing American popular cultural landscape.
Mm-hmm. So it was, would you say it's sort of a vehicle to talk about the films themselves, the actors and what they went through, but also the world around them?
Absolutely. You nailed it. Absolutely.
I was listening.
Yeah.
So, you had mentioned earlier that you have a short film that you would like to show because it gives us good overview of the book. And so why don't we do that? And then we'll come back to more questions because I have a bunch more. So this will help our audience understand what the book is about.
Super. And so I'm just going to share screen now, and you can let me know if, just if there's any problem. Okay. Super. So here we go. Okay. And oops.
I'm a professor of film at Vassar College, where I teach African American cinema, documentary history, theory and criticism, and a range of genre courses. But I'm really excited to tell you about.
Sorry, let me just start again. Mina, can you? Because I lost you is what happened. So
I turned my video off.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right, here we go. Starting again.
Okay, I'll keep my video on so I can say.
Okay, perfect. There we go. Okay. And share. Okay, great.
Hi, this is Mia Mass. I'm a professor of film at Vassar College, where I teach African American cinema, documentary history, theory and criticism, and a range of genre courses. But I'm really excited to tell you about my new book, Black Rodeo, which is a history of the African American Western. And it covers a range of films from Sergeant Rutledge all the way through to Django Unchained and beyond. So why don't we get started? The Western is easily the most impactful American film genre. First of all, it's the genre most intimately linked with our national history. It's also the genre that has been most involved in the mythologization of that history, the kind of embellishment and rewriting and reimagining of that history. It's also the genre most linked to this notion of manifest destiny, the idea that certain people, certain groups of people were entitled to move in, settle, and claim the land as their own. But all of those sort of social and sociological reasons aside, it's also an important genre because it's the one most linked to other genres. So when we're talking about the Western genre, we're really talking about the reinterpretation of history into cinematic myth. Dominant history is really told by those who are in power and those who've had the military prowess or military might to displace native peoples, to enact laws, or maybe even to conscript former slaves, formerly enslaved persons, into service in the American cavalry. So when we're looking at the Western genre, we want to think about that backdrop and that history that's been turned into mythology. So there were some early notable Black cowboys. Chief among them was Bill Pickett. And Bill Pickett was an early rodeo and trick rider who rode in the Miller Brothers traveling rodeo. He appeared in early silent films and on what we call actualities, but he was also in feature films. He was in a film titled The Bulldogger and in a film titled The Crimson Skull. And so he was one of the first to be featured in what we would now call early Westerns. And beyond him, we might think of somebody like Nat Love, who was another important sort of rustler, cattle rustler, and cattle driver, trick rider, known in various territories from Tennessee to Kansas and beyond. There were some early movies and filmmakers that really helped to get the movement of Black filmmaking started. Chief among them was Oscar Micheaux. And Oscar Micheaux was a maverick filmmaker who started making films in the silent era, and he made films from the teens all the way through the 1950s. Two of his films that stand out are The Homesteader and Within Our Gates. But The Homesteader is what we might describe as an early Western, and he wasn't alone. There were folks like Spencer Williams or George and Noble Johnson. These were other African-American writers, actors, directors who were actively involved in making all-Black cast films in the teens and even into the 1930s and 40s. In addition to the Black filmmakers, you also had folks like Richard Kahn. And Richard Kahn made 3 all-Black cast Westerns, directed 3 that we know about: Harlem Rides the Range, 2 Gunmen from Harlem, and The Bronze Buckaroo. And all 3 of these all-Black cast Westerns went on to be very successful with Black and white audiences. These films fought the erasure of African Americans and other people of color by incorporating African Americans into the central cast, into the not just the supporting players in the backdrop or the mise en scène, but actually the protagonists of these films. And so you begin to see people like Woody Strode, Jim Brown, Fred Williamson, and many others starring in Westerns and being the primary focus or the characters that are driving the narrative trajectory. And that was a real sea change or a real shift that happens in the post-World War II era. So there were Black Westerns earlier than 1950, but the genre of Black Westerns really takes on a more political direction or political trajectory after World War II.
And I hate that. Do you hear me? I'm a man.
If we look at the films in which Jim Brown starred, like Rio Contra and then 100 Rifles, and then we follow his career through to Fred Williamson's career and even Sidney Poitier's directorial debut, Buck and the Preacher, we see that the films begin to turn up the volume on the political content, on the ways in which the Black cowboy is demanding and ultimately expecting respect and becomes a leader in these narratives. So he moves from a silent trope, as in, say, John Ford's Sergeant Rutledge, where Woody Strode almost doesn't speak in the film, to becoming active narrative agents. Not only are they agents of action, but they're agents of change. So in Buck and the Preacher, Buck is a seminal figure, a central figure in creating Native American and African American coalition against white supremacy.
Just as mainstream Westerns evolved and combined with other genres, so too have Black Westerns. They have changed in style and form alongside Hollywood films, and they've continued the tradition of presenting African American perspectives on contemporary politics.
You see over time the way Black Westerns begin to amalgamate, incorporate a range of other genres to reward their loyal fans, the Western spectators, by bringing in some of the visual pleasures of other genres and just mixing it up to create something that is recognizable as a Western, but still pleasurable in other ways.
I hope all of you have enjoyed it. I hope by word and mouth that you will pass this around, because it's quite a thing for the Americans to know all of this history and not have any of it edited out.
So if anyone is interested in learning more about these films, check out my book, Black Rodeo, A History of the African American Western.
Hopefully you were able to see and hear that.
Yep, all of it. Thank you. Oh, when you told me about it, I was like, how can we add to our Q&A? That was fabulous.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Great.
So again, for people listening in, feel free to put questions in the Q&A, but I'll just keep going until you do. So my question for you about coming through from that clip is that, you know, Westerns have always been considered, or the West has always been considered sort of like the Wild West, and anything can happen, and it's a very independent place. Was it more accessible for Black actors to be in Westerns and in other types of genres?
Great question. No, it was not easier or more accessible. In fact, I would say it was probably less, accessible, because there was the perception, there's been the perception for so long that African Americans have not been, a part of the settling and shaping of the American West. That is an issue that historians have been working on for some time. So folks like Philip Durham and Everett Leroy Jones with their book, The Negro Cowboys, or William Lorenz Katz in his scholarship, or Sarah Massey, or Art Burton. Many of these historians of the African-American experience in the West and of Black cavalrymen have been documenting in their scholarship the experiences of African Americans on the Western frontier. Many of those stories, and the ones that are most well documented, are the experiences of former cavalry officers or former cavalrymen. So we know that, a bit about their experiences, and that we also know that after slavery ended, that a good portion, almost 1/3 of the population was African American on the ranches and plantations in the West, Southwest, and the labor that in the post or in the Reconstruction era that remained out West continued to do that labor, that a lot of that menial labor on those farms and ranches, even after slavery formally ended. So there is quite a bit of documentation now that 25 to 30, maybe even more than 30% of the population was African American and played a major role in the settling of California and Los Angeles. But ironically, to your question, no, the history of how the West was won, how the West was settled, the image of the rugged individualist American cowboy has, for lack of a better term, kind of been whitewashed, unfortunately. But I think what's exciting about this moment is there's a lot of new literature, a lot of new scholarship, both in history and cinema, but and also a number of equestrian and rodeo clubs and groups that are active, that are trying to speak about that history as well.
Do you know if there's any in Massachusetts? Because that would be so much fun to join a rodeo club, don't you think?
Yeah, sure. I'll look into that for you, Mina. Are you a rider?
No, I just want to go watch.
Yeah, sure,
I'm
absolutely.
a spectator.
Yeah. Well, the good news is they are growing and they do travel. These rodeos actually do travel. So they're very well maybe an opportunity for you to see some rodeo action.
I'll go out west, but I just think that's a thing that people, they have a vision of, or an expectation of, and then, to see it live actually brings it live, like you understand it better and how it's changed over time. And I guess I wonder, I'm gonna ask some of the questions here, but somebody does say, I can't wait to watch the movies you're mentioning because I love horseback riding. So that brings us back to where you kind of got started.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is that, there are also people who have mixed feelings about different rodeo disciplines. But one of the things that I talk about in the book is a film that I found that, many years ago, actually before I started working on Black Rodeo as a book project. It was a documentary, and it's the documentary from which its name. It's a documentary titled Black Rodeo by Jeff Kanew. Jeff Kanew is was at the time a young independent filmmaker who learned about an all African American traveling rodeo that was going to appear on Randall's Island in Manhattan. And he thought, what a great opportunity. I want to film this. And this just so happened to be a rodeo which Woody Strode was going to make an appearance. And he actually documents the unexpected appearance of Muhammad Ali showing up at this rodeo. And what you see in the film is that these traveling performers have a relationship with their animals, with their livestock, but also with their horses that we haven't really had an opportunity to see represented in popular culture, a real caring relationship. And so that's been sort of nice to uncover as well.
Paula has a two-part question. What is your favorite African-American Western movie and your favorite African-American movie star?
Oh, so cute.
It's a tough one.
So my favorite Western would probably be Buck and the Preacher, since, it was the film that sort of started me on this journey. And then the second one was its film star?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's too hard. It's a little bit like saying, who's your favorite relative? And I make that analogy because, you have a different relationship to your relatives. You're not going to have the same relationship with an auntie that you have with a cousin, right? So it's different. You have different expectations of those relationships, right? So I think the same is true of film stars. You enjoy seeing Idris Elba in a different way, right? Than you enjoy seeing, Danny Glover, right? And so it's hard to say, but let's ask her which is her favorite.
I can just tell you that Idris Elba, I could watch him all day. So.
Exactly. Well, I could watch him boil water, so he wouldn't have to be in cowboy gear.
This is why we're best friends, everyone. So I want to go back to something that I read about your books that they really kind of talk about and explain both blaxploitation and westploitation. What does that mean in context to what you write?
Sure. So I am trying to tease out for folks that not all of the Westerns that I'm talking about are like quality films, right? They're not all highbrow art house, quality films. Some of the films were made during the era of blaxploitation filmmaking, right? And one of the things I try to do in the book is unpack what we mean by blaxploitation, because I think it's a term also that isn't fully understood in terms of its nuances and what it means, and that exploitation filmmaking is a mode of is a kind of filmmaking and we've seen various kinds of exploitation cinema. Teen exploitation, going back to the 50s with all of the juvenile delinquency films. We've seen women in prison pictures. So I want to contextualize what we mean by blaxploitation, first of all. And then on top of that, I need to layer the fact that the elements of Western films can have become exploitation cinema as well, right? And so separate from, say, even African-American culture, we see within the Western genre certain elements of exploitation filmmaking. And by that, when we use that term, we're talking about industrial mode of practice. Those are usually films that are very inexpensively made very quickly, often with non-professional actors. They don't have the same production values, and they're made quickly with an eye towards profit rather than with an eye towards real quality. Now, just because they're not expensively made or particularly high quality doesn't mean they haven't found their audience. Some of these films have been, for one reason or another, very popular with audiences at given particular historical moments. So I think it's worthwhile to look at those films, even though in the past people have said, oh, but those aren't, highbrow, artsy, expensively made films. They're trash, or they're lowbrow, so I don't want to look at them or talk about them. Luckily, in film studies, we've come a long way so that lots of folks are now looking at exploitation cinemas and understanding that they spoke to and speak to audiences in particular ways at particular reasons, and become cult films, often may engender cult cinema movements, and often have politically transgressive agendas and outcomes that are not often incorporated in mainstream, more expensive Hollywood cinema. So those politically progressive elements find their way sometimes into this exploitation cinema. So to answer your question, when I'm writing about these films, I'm interested in why were they exploited? Why did these particular films land in this arena? And that's sort of what I look at.
And so to continue on that, because in the little clip you showed, you talked about how African-American actors in Westerns started leading the narrative eventually. So when did you see that switch when it didn't feel exploitative, it felt more like narrative?
I would say it begins with Woody Strode in Sergeant Rutledge, right?
Interesting, because that's the one he didn't speak very much.
He doesn't speak very much, but up until this point, we really hadn't had any African-American figures or cavalry officers headline in a film. He doesn't speak that much, but he does utter some lines, and he has some monologues and makes some statements in which he speaks truth to power in a rather incisive way. So there are moments in the film when he and the Constance Towers character are holed up, and are waiting for some assistance and some help. And he's been injured, And he talks about trying to stay alive. And she says, you know, I don't see why there's be any problem with the two of us being here together. She's a white woman, he's an African-American man. And she says, we're just two people trying to stay alive. And he says things to her like, lady, you don't know how hard I'm trying to stay alive. So there were these utterances, these subtle critiques that make their way through in that film. So you're right, he doesn't speak much, but it's the beginning of a turning point. And then you gradually see these films turning up the volume, becoming more political. The next sort of Oh, and then Jim Brown's films, right? Because he goes from being a cavalry officer who's duty bound and dutiful to someone who is a gun-toting, sort of more rebellious, sort of, again, speaking truth and acting on truth to power in particular ways. And then certainly a film that turns the tables is Buck and the Preacher, right? Where Poitier and Poitier's Buck and Belafonte's Preacher really form coalition between African Americans and Native Americans.
Oh, interesting. I have not seen that film, but I'm absolutely going to.
Oh yeah. I would almost say start there, and then you can go back and start again.
I have a whole list from today, but one of the things that also came out in the clip was that you said that both Black and white audiences enjoyed these films. What was it about that people that, you know, had other issues and other, problems could enjoy a film together?
Okay. Well, number one is the star value. So Jim Brown and Fred Williamson had been major football stars and had cultivated something of a following in the football arena. And so it's funny, one of the articles that I cite in the book is an article, I think it's out of Ebony magazine, Football Heroes Invade Hollywood. And it's about the shift, the movement of African-American football stars into acting roles and into careers as film stars. Mm-hmm. And so you begin to see that they had a following not only among African-American spectators, but also among white spectators. And that was true in part because Fred Williamson was so good looking, right? And so they were kind of, on the cusp or on the sort of walking that line between attractive, athletic, matinee idol types and action heroes. And so they were able to turn or convert physical capital into celebrity capital in particular ways.
Oh, that's interesting. And writing Divas and writing Black Rodeo, did you discover that there was a discrepancy between how difficult are the challenges between female celebrity Black actors and male celebrity Black actors?
Wait, sorry, say that again, I lost you.
So you wrote Divas first, and then you wrote Black Rodeo. Did you find that there was the challenges were different for the female celebrities versus the male celebrities?
Yeah, I definitely saw a difference, or would argue that there's a difference in the sense that women definitely had more obstacles, right? And partially that has to do with the fact that it's societal, right? That we live in a patriarchal society, and that creates a whole series of obstacles and expectations of what, in the 1950s, for example, a woman should look like, how she should behave, and by extension, that what kinds of roles would be written for women, right? And so it was definitely more challenging I would say, for women to find roles that gave them breadth, depth of character, It certainly is very, very challenging for men as well. But I would say that the range of roles for women was probably narrower. So men could move in at least into action cinema, into war pictures, into Westerns, whereas those opportunities, those genres are not really open to women in the same way. They have to do domestic pictures, romantic pictures, melodramas, right? And there'll be men cast in those, but there'll be women really can only headline in those pictures.
That's curious, because I wonder, even 50, 60 years on, if that has changed so much now, you don't see the range as much for women as for men.
You absolutely don't see, you're absolutely right. You don't see as much range for women as for men. There's a wonderful study out of the Annenberg School of Communication in which they take a close look at something like 1,300 popular films. And your audience can go online and Google this. This study is available. It's free online. And again, the title's Inequality in 1,300 Popular Films. And they look at race, gender, LGBTQ issues, and disability and age in cinema. And you see that women of color and older women still lag behind men in almost all areas of film production, and certainly in the realm of being behind the camera as filmmakers. So you're right, we still have a long way to go.
Do you think that one of the things we talked about earlier is just how much I love the fact that you're writing not necessarily about all of the challenges, because there were challenges, but also about just something normal, that people did. They made films. And I wonder how have you felt like that's been received really well for you, as opposed to, not as opposed to, but like in addition to some of the other stories that are a little bit more about the challenges?
So you're saying that the people, sorry, I didn't quite understand the question, because you're saying people made films and that.
Right. So that is something that can be really joyful, and just people living their lives, as opposed to very we hear a lot of the books that have come out in the last, I guess, 10 years about African-American experiences is about the slavery. And we talked about this yesterday, so I'm not saying it as well, but just, that yours is talking about something that just can be very joyful, and just about how somebody has this talent and they make it happen.
Okay, yes. And following up on our conversation from the other day, I get you now. So I appreciate your observation. So thank you for saying that. I mean, I hope people read the book and take that positive, joyful sentiment away from it. I think there was that said, however, I think there's a lot of struggle that went along with the production of these films as well, right? So you're right. These are not all films about slavery, or in which the characters are downtrodden or struggling, or seeing and experiencing really hard times, but there are some very uplifting narratives. I think part of what we're seeing is the politicization of the Western genre at this moment in the 60s and the 70s. And we're seeing more African-American directors come in, and more African-American control of the narratives. And as African-American artists like Poitier, and then even Fred Williamson beginning to direct some of his own pictures, you're seeing folks recognize that Black audiences want uplifting stories, as opposed to stories where the Black characters always die, saving the white characters, or always die first, right? So it's partially a function of the movement of African Americans into the film industry, and playing more of a role behind the camera and in the creation and development of the stories. But that said, Poitier worked really hard on Buck and the Preacher, and it was his directorial debut, and there were definitely challenges in the production of that film. And there were stories about Raquel Welch and Jim Brown not getting along or getting along. You know, there's a lot of folklore around that film, 100 Rifles. So there's a lot of nuance there as well, but it's a great question.
Well, I think that, and you answered it so well, given how poorly I stated it, but that your book has such good balance between, you know, the challenges that the actors experienced and what they were able to accomplish.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Very well said, Mina. Yeah, there were definitely, you know, there's definitely an effort to balance the challenges that they are encountering with the industry, with society, with expectations of Black actors, and on the one hand, and then their sort of triumphant desire to push through, to speak truth to power, to push, you know, to push the envelope in some ways. And it's exciting to see, to look at this moment with the kind of hopeful eyes as well, and see some changes, although, you know, there were clearly struggles there as well.
Yeah, we still have a ways to go.
Yeah.
So Paula, who did agree with Idris, says that she's from Kansas, although she lives in Massachusetts. She knows that many of the drovers who drove Texas cattle in railheads in Kansas in the 1800s were African American. Are there any Black Westerns featuring trail driver characters?
Not really, no. But it just goes to show you that that's a screenplay you should work on. Is there a name, Paula?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Paula, that's your screenplay. You should go write that. That sounds like a fabulous film, and it would make a wonderful story.
Okay, you have your challenge, Paula. Maybe you and Idris can get together and write it together. So you have talked a lot about, you know, obviously the films and things like that, but I think I'd like to ask, are there any other books out there right now that you think we should be reading?
Sure. Okay, so one that comes to mind is a wonderful book titled The Rosewood Massacre, an archaeology and history, I should pick it up for you, of intersectional violence. And I love this book because, here it is. I love this book because it's a great book to read alongside, if you can see this, oh wait, there we go, if you can see this. It's a great book to read alongside the film Rosewood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Rosewood is one of the films that I look at in my book. Rosewood, Posse, Rosewood, and Django Unchained are sort of part of one chapter. And it's interesting, I spent some time at the James Museum of Western and Wildlife Art in Tampa, Florida. And when I went there, you know, it was wonderful to see this beautiful new museum. They were a little bit experiencing an identity crisis because they're like, well, we're a Western museum in the South. And I was like, no, but you are completely, it's a completely legitimate enterprise. And I said, I look at a film like Rosewood as a kind of Western, and I discuss it as a Western in stylistically speaking in my book. And then I think that the trauma and the drama of the Rosewood Massacre absolutely speaks to the reality that the same contests and struggles for land, for freedom, for access to opportunity, for a right to claim one's land and develop a community was present as much in the South as in the Southwest. So I would encourage people to take a look at that book, you know, among some of the other books now that are charting the Black Rodeo experience, and the Cowboys of the Black Cowboys of Rodeo is another wonderful book that's out right now. I'm just so happy to see the growth of books that are about the African-American rodeo and Western culture experience.
I forgot to ask you about your story about meeting Pam Grier.
Oh,
I want to hear this, and I want everybody else to.
sure. Happy to share that with you. It's not quite a Black Rodeo story, but it relates to divas on screen. So I wrote Divas, and I was telling Mina that it's been so rewarding to see how books stay with you and live with you for a really long time, because just this past fall, I was invited to curate a 14-film retrospective of Pam Grier movies at the BFI, or British Film Institute. And once I had, curated the films for them and written some of the copy for their publications, they said, by the way, we're going to bring Pam Grier over to London. Would you be willing to come out and interview her on stage? And I was like, well, if you twist my arm, I guess I'll have to say yes to that. So it was a wonderful invitation opportunity. I got to meet Pam Grier and interview her on stage, and we just had a wonderful time meeting. So it just goes to show you, you never know where these projects are going to take you, even if it's many years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she's such an icon. It must have been.
Yeah, it was really a career highlight for me. Absolutely. I mean, I have long been a student, obviously, not only of Poitier, but of Pam Grier's career, and such an admirer of her work. And this is speaking of exploitation movements, this is somebody who worked through sexploitation, blaxploitation, made action pictures, and has since been paid homage to with Jackie Brown, right? And she's still working and developing projects. So she was not only an icon in the 70s, but also a figure that I think really helped inspire artists like Foxy Brown, to develop her image and icon. A lot of the young rappers in the 90s, and early 2000s were inspired by Pam Grier. So definitely she's a cultural icon with a considerable longevity.
Mm-hmm. I read somewhere that Lizzo is a big fan of hers. I was like, see?
Exactly. Lizzo and many others. So
yes.
Absolutely.
But like, some people are just timeless. That's what she was popular in her time, and she's been an icon for me and for so many people coming up.
Yeah, and Pam Grier is, again, one of these people who often spoke truth to power, thought and lived and imagined outside the box. She's an equestrian and a person who has a special riding school. She works with kids of different abilities and autism in her riding school. So she's just an incredibly dynamic person doing so many things, from her work in film and television to her riding school, and just a very kind and thoughtful and warm person as well.
You must have had so much to talk about.
Yeah.
And so last question, and I have the same one, Paula has it too, is what's next for you? What are you writing? I know that Black Rodeo just came out, so no pressure to have it out to next week, but what's next?
Right. Well, I love the question. Well, one of the things that I discovered on my journey of writing Black Rodeos, I hadn't paid much attention to comic books, actually, and to African-American comic book characters. But I learned on this journey, that Lobo, I wonder if I don't have an image to show you, but Lobo was the first African-American comic book character to have his own series. He predates Black Panther, because Black Panther's 1966. Lobo was his first issue, appeared in 1965. So he was a Western hero, but sadly he only had 2 issues to his series because it was canceled. But they are 2 beautiful issues, and he was a gunslinger. Named Lobo in the first issue. I won't give you all the details. I'll just let you sort of look him up. And I would love to write more about Lobo and develop an article and some publications around this figure and around what could have come and what still could come from that. I believe there's potential to develop a film around the figure of Lobo.
You're totally talking my language, because I love comics. And earlier when you were talking about lowbrow, I was like, oh, I'm a total Marvels and DC fan, but you know, I don't consider that lowbrow, but
Yeah.
I will read anything you write, Mia.
Right. Well, and nor do I, but I recognize that there are people who look at some elements of popular culture and make these distinctions, right? If it's not art house cinema, or if it has a certain set of qualities, I mean, Mina, there are even people who don't like horror. So I have been, you know, I have been sitting at dinners next to people who consider horror cinema schlock. And I'm usually like appalled, but you know, but there are some people who can't appreciate horror. So that's why I say that it's a little bit like relatives. It's about your relationship to the material, and everyone has sort of a different threshold for certain kinds of films. And so I want to be sensitive to that and recognize different tastes.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because so often, you know, things that we enjoy are kind of denigrated because they are enjoyable.
Yeah.
And but for Black Rodeo, I think we can enjoy it and also really learn a lot. So I think that that's a perfect balance.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you tonight.
Oh my gosh, I've had the best time. I really appreciate all of your thoughts, and I really love that little clip that you showed, and I'll share it with everybody in my recap email. Thank you all for being here tonight. And again, you can buy Mia's book signed by Bookplate from Bank Square Books. I'll send that link out as well. So have a wonderful night, everybody. Mia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mina. It was really fun to be here.
Have a good night.
See ya.